Good evening, everyone. I hope that you, whenever you're watching this, are having a lovely day. For me, it is Friday evening. Um, I wasn't expecting to make a video, truth be told. Um, but originally, I was going to continue introducing myself to this tarot deck, Black Tarot by Nyasha Williams. Um, because that's something I like to do is like getting to know the tarot deck, letting the tarot deck get to know me, etc. So that was my plans for this Friday evening. And then something came in and it's like, no, you're going to make a video. And specifically, you're going to make a video using the script that you wrote back in, I think, December of 2024. It's been sitting in the drafts, if you will, for a long time, and today's the day. And so that's what we're going to do. Um, Specifically, I was told the video goes up before midnight hits. And so this will be raw, unedited. I was really thinking, I'm like, wait a minute, the camera's not good enough. Let me see if I can figure out a different mic situation. And every step I took trying to figure out how to make this more polished, I was told, nope, do the thing. Like, and so that's what we're going to do. So this is a scripted video, except for this part right now where we're talking. So I'm going to block that off as a separate timestamp, and I'm going to go ahead and shift to the script. And yeah, let's go. Before we get started, I want to let you know that there are timestamps in this video that will allow you to skip around to the information you want and or need the most. I know I've definitely complained about those online recipes that write mini novellas before telling you how to make a chocolate chip cookie, and as someone who is long-winded but also has issues with maintaining focus, I want to give you the opportunity to proceed through this video in whatever way best suits you. Let's get into it. Hello, friends, and welcome to my first ever guided tarot reading. This is something new for me, and while I am absolutely certain that I am not the first person to do this sort of thing, this is at the very least the first time I've seen anything like this, seen or done anything quite like this. So, what is a guided tarot reading? Essentially, instead of me doing a reading for you, whether that's a directly channeled reading for you, pick a card readings for specific groups of people, or a general reading for the collective, I'm going to leave the cards in your hands. You will be the one performing the tarot reading, and I'm going to give you, I'm going to guide you through a series of questions, reflections, and meditations for you to receive the message that is meant for you directly. If you don't have your own physical tarot deck, that is entirely okay. I personally recommend the Galaxy Tarot app. It's what I use for myself most days, since I don't always have the energy or capacity to work with physical cards. So that's a phone app, and yeah. Um, Sorry, this is a bit ad lib because I now actually have this physical tarot deck sitting next to me that I was originally going to be doing this evening. But even so, I'm working in a space with I have limited space right now, and so I still find it very useful to use the Galaxy Tarot app as a general thing, while I would use tarot decks like this one for more specific reasons, at least until I have more space to use them. Anyway, off scripting, back on script. Um, you can also find websites that'll pull tarot cards for you. I do want to encourage you to create some sort of personal connection with whatever deck you want to use. Using a random website on a public computer may yield different results than using a carefully chosen website on a personal computer, for example. But you should use whatever version of tarot is most accessible for you, and don't let anyone shame you for using accommodations that make life better or easier for you. And speaking of accessibility and accommodations, this reading is going to be a reflection on themes surrounding disability, what we can learn from disabled people, how we can tackle our own internalized ableism, and how we can create a better world in light of the fact that we all will either become disabled one day or die before we get to experience disability for ourselves. So brief note here, going off script a little bit again. I am disabled. I do identify as disabled, as in like I am disabled, and the word I use to describe myself is disabled, more so than a person with a disability or differently abled or whatnot. Like, I do identify as disabled, and we live in a culture that largely treats disabled as like this dirty word, where there's this sense of you wouldn't want to call a person disabled because it's seen as negative. I kind of see it as the way that we treat the word fat, right? And so a lot of fat people are reclaiming the word fat because they want to treat fat as a neutral term. It's not an insult, it's not a slight, it's not anything like that. It's just a descriptor. And as someone who is fat and disabled, I'm still unlearning that a bit when it comes to the word fat. But when it comes to disabled, I am disabled. I consider myself to be a part of the disabled community. I try to be an advocate for disabled folks, disabled causes whenever possible. So yeah, that's a bit of my context. I'm speaking from someone who is a neurodivergent, which I know I've talked about on this channel before, but also I have mobility issues and um, dizziness issues. I'm a fall risk, etc. So any number of things there. Anyway, back on script. Um, we live in a culture that prioritizes, even idolizes things like youth, physical fitness, and attaining specific body types, all of which are things that we often place under the umbrella of health. But when we have people who pursue endless cosmetic procedures in order to obscure signs of aging, people who push themselves to the point of breaking in order to be fit, and people who will deprive their bodies of nutrients in order to look thin under the misguided notion that thinness is a measure of health, it's important to interrogate our thought processes surrounding health and those who are widely considered to lack health, those of us who are disabled. This is not meant to shame anyone for their individual choices or health concerns, but to put a spotlight on the ways in which our society often muddies the waters in terms of how we understand health, often to our detriment. So, wow, so, going off script again, I didn't read this script before jumping into it, and I did that intentionally, and it's because specifically I was told, like, listen, if you try to look at the script again, you're gonna try to like overanalyze it and try to fix it for like the next 20 minutes instead of just like actually uploading the video. So here in the next paragraph, it's nothing bad. It's where I actually talk about myself as a disabled person and my experiences with disability. And so it turns out some of the time when I go off script, it is entirely likely that I'll end up being a little bit redundant. But you know, imperfection is not a problem. I mean, I am a recovering perfectionist, and so I'm in the midst of trying to do things that will actively like challenge my notion that things have to be perfect in order for things to be worth it, because they'll never be perfect. And so a lot of the unedited, rough styling, kind of like somewhat ad lib, somewhat reading, what have you, is largely part of my efforts to remind myself that perfection is not the goal, and half the times, you know, what is it? I can't remember the saying, but it's something to the effect of like, um, I know perfection is the enemy of good. Like, perfect is one thing, but done is better. And so yeah, I almost definitely drink to that. All right, back on script. For context, I myself am a disabled person, and so my creation of this spread is largely influenced by my own personal experiences. I don't wish to share my diagnoses at this time. Not only are my diagnoses subject to change upon further examination, but I found myself trying to use the diagnostic process to defend the validity of my health-related needs, and I don't want to do that here. In a world where fake claiming or insisting that a person, especially an online content creator, is faking their disability for one reason or another is rampant, I found that the best defense isn't so. Let me fake claiming is insisting that a person, especially an online content creator, is faking their disability for one reason or another. And so I'm going to circle back around. In a world where fake claiming is rampant, I found that the best defense isn't trying to prove yourself to other people, but rather letting people think what they think and doing your best to live your best life regardless. That said, I'm willing to share that I have mobility issues that necessitate the use of a rollator walker, as well as chronic pain and mental health struggles. And this is the sort of reading that I wish I would have had when I became more acutely aware of my disability 2 or 3 years ago. While I've always been disabled, it was something that I could ignore for quite some time until I couldn't. And coming to terms with that has been a lengthy journey, if I can be perfectly honest with you, and it's still ongoing. And that said, I learn best by teaching others, so as a religious leader and person of faith, I hope that this tarot spread is useful for you, for me, and for anyone else who might stumble upon it. Lastly, before we begin, I want to provide a bit of context for how I conduct tarot readings. I'm well aware that some believe that tarot is something to be feared, something to be demonized, and something to be dismissed out of hand. And while I am no stranger to people treating me and my path in this way, I nevertheless believe that more education is better than less. So, I approach tarot as an art, not a science, as a mirror, not a window, as a guide to the present and the past that informs it, not the future. I do not believe that tarot can predict the future because I do not believe the future exists yet. To use an analogy, life is not a YouTube video, but a live stream. You can rewind, but you can't fast forward, and while we might miss certain details, the most important information is always in the present moment. The ability to read tarot, then, is akin to being able to identify tropes, literary devices, and the like. We may be able to predict surprise plot twists in movies and TV shows, but it often has more to do with pattern recognition than precognition. Tarot operates under the principle that the divine not only communicates in words, but in numbers, symbols, and, for lack of a better word, vibes. Tarot encourages the mind and spirit to tap into frequencies we might otherwise miss. At the end of the day, there is nothing uniquely mystical or magical about tarot cards, in the same way that there is nothing inherently special about the paper we print Bibles on. The sacred exists in the meaning and care we bring to these experiences, and in the same way that the Bible can be used in both healing and harmful ways, so too can tarot. So to that end, please note that I strive to ensure that all of my actions are in alignment with my basic core principles of love, justice, equity, compassion, and liberation. And when my actions inevitably fall short, I do my best to embody accountability and repair over defensiveness, guilt, shame, and despair. I am so far from perfect that it's laughable, and I am gradually allowing myself to relinquish the pursuit of perfection. There it is again. So that I might focus on the pursuit of that which is good and holy. And yes, that is me saying I don't believe there is anything divine about perfection, perhaps a topic for later discussion. That said, I fully acknowledge that tarot readings can bring up any number of feelings in people, and I encourage you to acknowledge those. If you find that tarot readings are not for you, whether due to trauma, fear, or spiritual misalignment, that is entirely okay, and I want to give you permission to step away whenever you deem it necessary. That said, if you find yourself challenged by my words in a way that unsettles you but does not frighten you, I encourage you to lean into that on your own terms. Tarot cannot tell you anything that you yourself do not already know, and tarot by its very nature is an exercise in interpretation. If my words do not align with your spirit, then you owe it to your spirit to honor that. That said, when you consider the fact that every single choice you've made in life has led you to this very moment that we are sharing together, I sincerely hope that you allow yourself to take something away from this moment, whether it's a message from the divine, a sense of curiosity about the words I share or the techniques that I use, or perhaps even just the realization that tarot might not be for you. With all that being said, let's get into the reading. This is a 7-card spread, and while there are certain spreads where I believe there's value to how the cards are laid out, like the Celtic Cross, this is not one of them. Place your cards wherever feels right. I myself, if I were doing it for myself, so when I've done this reading for myself, and I use the Galaxy Tarot app I mentioned, I actually think that off screen I'll probably use this new tarot deck that I have now that there's been a little bit of time between when I wrote this script and now, and now that I have a physical deck, I'll probably do a reading of my own another time. But the first time I did it, I used the Galaxy Tarot app. Use whatever works for you. All right. I'm going to take a sip of water before we get into the first card. All right. For the first card, I invite you to reflect on the following question. Where am I being called to heal the world? And as you draw this first card, I want to invite you to challenge the specifics of what healing means to you. So often we think of health and healing in binary frameworks. We're either healthy or unhealthy, healed or sick. And even when we acknowledge these binary points as a spectrum, or like I'm getting healthy or I'm in the process of healing, we often lose the plot when it comes to situations that don't adhere to these sorts of narratives. For example, if someone who was born with the ability to walk becomes paralyzed from the waist down, we might hope that they one day regain the ability to walk. But what if there's no chance of that happening? We might hope that the medical field will one day advance to the point where we can fix this paralyzed person, but what good is that in the present moment? Likewise, it isn't all too far-fetched to imagine that this wheelchair user might find community with other wheelchair users and might reach a point where relearning how to walk is no longer a primary goal. After all, many members of the deaf community don't see deafness as something to be cured, but as a unique culture to be celebrated. And so with all that in mind, I ask you to reflect on the question of how we might be called to heal the world, knowing that healing doesn't always mean fixing. I don't think there's a single person alive who doesn't wish that things were different about the world, and if there are, they've definitely reached a stage of enlightenment that I myself don't ever expect to reach. But what does changing the world and healing the world look like when we refuse to adopt a position of saviorism? What does healing look like when fixing is not the goal? And how do the cards inform your understanding? So, before we move into the second card, I want to go off script again and explain, excuse me, that this reading is not largely, this is a response to a course I had the pleasure of taking in fall of 2024, which was about theologies and disabilities. And so we looked at the way that religion has responded to disability throughout the years, how disability can orient around religion, what disabled identities have to contribute to the fields of religion, theology, etc. And so that feels like necessary context for this reading here, just because I had a semester of unpacking, thinking, reflecting, etc. And so this largely reflects that. And it may be a question that you haven't asked yourself. It might be something that you yourself haven't given a ton of thought to. It might actually even push up against biases that you yourself aren't ready to confront. And so when it comes to this reading, I recommend watching it more than one time, doing the reading more than one time. I myself am excited to do this reading for myself again using this new tarot deck. In fact, I'm hearing a voice in the back of my head saying, yeah, that's the next video, and you're probably going to film it today as well. So if you see me sitting in this same place, wearing the same dress, doing the damn thing, there you go. That said, I'm not changing clothes, but I might change the color of the lights back here to kind of switch it up a little bit. Was I on purple before? I have no idea what color I started on. We're going with purple now. I hope that was, even if it isn't, who cares? So yeah, just a weird moment to be in, and I kind of want to I don't know, let you into that process as well, just as my brain is going. So getting back on script. With that in mind, let's move on to the second card, asking ourselves, where am I called to heal myself? Again, if we acknowledge that we can be masterpieces and work in progress at the same time, constantly engaged in the process of becoming, neither fully whole nor fully broken at any point in time during our lives, what aspects of our life call for healing? And what does healing those aspects of our lives actually look like? There are inherent flaws to the belief that we are so perfect that we are beyond improvement, and there are inherent flaws to the belief that we can hate ourselves into a version of ourselves that we may one day love. Acknowledging that the answer must lie somewhere between those two extremes, where do we go from here? And how do the cards inform your understanding? From there, let's move on to the third card. In what ways have I been mistaking my strengths for weaknesses? Someone who I love and cherish deeply recently expressed to me that they felt shame after they found themselves crying in a public place, and I had to confess to them that as someone who often struggles to show negative emotions in public, I regarded their capacity to cry so openly as a positive thing. was a remarkably positive thing. So the last time I broke down crying, um, it's funny. There was a time when I actually cried after writing the script, but here, the last time I broke down crying before writing the script, I actually locked myself in my bathroom so that as few people as possible would bear witness to my collapsing. And even the most recent time I cried, I also attempted to distance myself, to be alone, to not, you know, be in public, to make sure that like I was as sequestered as possible. It just so happened that someone did join me and we were able to mourn together. But there's still this sense of like wanting to close myself off as much as possible. On the rare occasions that I cry, 'cause I don't even cry that often. There are times when I'm like, there's probably something to cry about. There's, something that I know I need to shed tears over, but I can't bring myself to do it. And so, with all of that being said, back on script, why wouldn't I see their vulnerability as something to admire? So often we look to other people as examples of what we want to be, and I find that more often than not, that which we admire in other people are traits that we ourselves possess, even if we've lost touch or perhaps never even made contact with those traits. I've always admired folks who could draw, but never realized up until recently, literally the past year or so, that it was a skill set that I had myself, or at the very least, a potential skill that lies dormant until such a time as I choose to develop it further. In that same way, the fact that I admire my friend for being able to cry so openly likely points to my own sensitivity that I learned to suppress somewhere along the way. It's probably indicative of the possibility that reconnecting with that sense of vulnerability is likely to yield a net positive result for me, even if the process may be uncomfortable or painful. So, what sorts of things have you been assuming to be weaknesses? Where might strength be hiding in those misconceptions? And once again, how do the cards inform your understanding? And next, we ask ourselves the reverse question: in what ways have I been mistaking my weaknesses for strength? When I was an undergrad, it was not at all uncommon to use lack of sleep as a badge of honors. Not only would we compare and compete to see who got the least sleep, but those of us in the honors program proudly wore shirts that said, "You can sleep when you're dead." And the irony of me typing this sentence at 1:55 a.m., whenever I wrote it, is not lost on me. But now that I'm 28 and no longer 18, I find myself more inclined to brag about the fact that I took a nap earlier today, giving me energy to burn the midnight oil. I'm slowly learning to prioritize and celebrate rest and rejuvenation over pushing myself to and over the brink of exhaustion. I'm gradually realizing that the ability to deny myself rest has always been a weakness of mine, not a strength. We live in a capitalistic society that encourages this sort of go, 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 go behavior, so it's not surprising to me that I might try to capitalize on that quality of mine. But we also live in a society that far too often champions violence and cruelty and selfishness, and we can no longer afford to treat those as strengths either. Um, I dissociated for a brief moment. I want to take a step back and read it again. I think maybe I need to hear it, maybe you need to hear it again as well. We live in a capitalistic society that encourages this sort of go, go, go behavior. So it's not surprising to me that I might try to capitalize on that quality of mine. But we also live in a society that far too often champions violence and cruelty and selfishness, and we can no longer afford to treat those as strengths either. As painful as it might be to acknowledge that something we thought of as a strength has in fact been holding us back, it is important to remember that we must also do the reverse. Consider where we have mistaken our strength for weakness. Where might we bolster our weaknesses, especially those disguised as strengths, with our strengths, especially those disguised as weaknesses? And again, how did the cards inform your understanding? We now draw nearer to the closing of our reading with this fifth card, this fifth question, this fifth reflection. Where have I been calling for external change when the call has been coming from inside the house? We've delved into what the world might demand of us, and we've examined our strengths, our weaknesses, and our need for healing. But now comes the time to clearly delineate between the world within us and the world around us. My father is fond of saying that when we point one finger at others, there are three, or with my hypermobile hands, four fingers pointing back at us. In other words, Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror, as frustrating as it might be to admit it, at least for me, is entirely correct. Making a positive change in the world has to start with us. So where have you been calling for change when you needed to embody it? I want to say that again. Where have you been calling for change out there when you needed to embody it? Perhaps you've been pointing out the need for others to make their spaces more accessible, but not considering the ways that you can make your spaces more accessible. Perhaps you've been decrying the ways in which our society pretends that COVID-19 is no longer a concern, but you reject the notion of wearing a mask in public spaces. Perhaps you found yourself desperate for positive disability representation in the media, but you yourself, despite being a writer, avoid writing disabled characters or procrastinate on writing entirely, meaning that the disabled characters you have written will have to wait that much longer to see the light of day. And yes, that one is 100% directed at me. I published a book in December of 2023, and I have not written fiction. So it's a book of poetry, and I haven't sat down to write fiction in much, much longer. Not a day goes by when I don't think of this story I want to tell, and I'm currently trying to get myself back on track because as someone who wants to see more representation of many different communities, including the disabled community, as someone with disabled characters, I better get to writing that, shouldn't I? Anywho, so where are you being called to shift the focus back onto yourself so that the world might follow and or be changed by your example? How do the cards inform your understanding? And as we draw near to the end of this reading, I ask that you go ahead and like and subscribe if this has been helpful to you at all. Yeah, it really helps me. It really helps us get out to more people. And I like knowing that I'm doing a good job. I like the feedback. I like hearing back from you. And so, yeah, it means a lot. We now come to card number 6. Where have I been clinging to individuality when collaboration and collective action are most needed? Speaking as a citizen of the American Empire, one of the biggest lies we are force-fed is that we are all individuals, ultimately responsible for ourselves and no one else. It's the pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality, the line of thinking that encourages people to climb the ladder of success and then pull it up behind them. It's the reason why so many of us wait for someone to come and save us, whether that's waiting for the politician who will fix the country, waiting for the rebel with a cause who will lead us to revolution, waiting for the Son of God who will return on the clouds, clothed in glory, ready to create heaven on earth for the faithful. It's the reason so many of us think we can't save ourselves. And in a sense, we're correct. We, as individuals, cannot save ourselves. But as a collective, we're damn near unstoppable. And those in power know this, and they benefit from our division. Any positive change we see in the world is going to be rooted in community collaboration and collective action. So where have we forgotten that we not only stand on the shoulders of giants, but also stand shoulder to shoulder with present-day giants in their own right? Where have we neglected our neighbors in favor of ourselves? And how do the cards inform your understanding? And finally, the 7th card. What am I being called to unlearn? While we often frame this march to justice as one of learning, it is far more so, and perhaps even exclusively, a journey of unlearning. We don't need to learn how to listen to our bodies so much as we need to unlearn the program that has led us to believe that our bodies cannot be trusted. We don't need to learn how to be ourselves authentically, so much as we need to unlearn the masks we've created to protect ourselves in a world where uniqueness is so often suppressed in favor of the status quo. And while we may need to learn more about disability, more about human rights initiatives across history, more about mutual aid, more about current legal obstacles, and so on, so much of the work we must engage in is that of unlearning the falsehoods that we've absorbed, either through direct instruction or by virtue of the fact that marginalization and oppression are a part of the air we breathe and the water we drink, so to speak. I often take issue with the argument that nobody is born racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, ableist, classist, etc., but rather taught to be racist, etc. Not because it's untrue, but because it so often downplays the role that cultural conditioning plays in our lives. Our parents may have never sat down with us and taught us to view disabled people with pity and derision, but if that's how we see disabled people, if that's how we if that's how we see disabled people depicted in the media, then it's still something we've been taught and something we must unlearn. And this is all the more true for disabled people struggling to unpack the internalized ableism that drives us to ignore our bodily clues, push ourselves too hard, deny ourselves accommodations, minimize our symptoms, hold ourselves to the same standard as able-bodied people, and otherwise inflict harm upon ourselves because of the gap between who we are and who we ought to be. And so with this final card, I invite you to ask yourself, what is it that you are being called to unlearn in this moment, and how do the cards inform your decision? Whew. Sorry, this is off script, but I want to invite y'all to take a breath. Take a moment to just... I don't know. I don't know why that was... It's funny, I've been sipping water throughout this, but sometimes I get so wrapped up that I just forget to breathe, and so I'm gonna invite you to take another breath with me. Just... Ooh. And as we wrap things up, I want to thank you so much for joining me here today. Like I said, this is a new format for me as a tarot reader. Also, as a YouTuber, this is the first time. I watch a ton of pick a card readings as a YouTube consumer, but this is definitely the first time I've done anything like this for myself as a YouTuber, so that's huge. New format for me as a tarot reader, as a YouTuber, as a person, but it was quite rewarding for me to create, and I hope that it also brings a sense of light, joy, and direction into your life. If you are a disabled person, I hope that this might be a perennial resource for you to use as you make sense of your own disability. And if you aren't someone who identifies as disabled, I hope you'll keep disabled people in your thoughts as you navigate through life. Like I said towards the beginning of this video, disability is something that affects all of us. As we age, we become more and more disabled. As we fall victim to injury, we experience disability either temporarily or permanently. And as such, all of us will either become disabled at some point in our lives or will simply die before we experience it. Therefore, as you reflect on these themes of healing and transformation, I implore you to not treat disability as a hypothetical or as a metaphor, but as a lived experience that billions experience on a daily basis, and as a lived experience that you yourself will likely one day encounter. Likewise, I hope that you might come to understand disability to not be a death sentence, something to be pitied, or something to be avoided at all costs, but rather as a natural state of being, just like race, sex, gender, orientation, age, or class. Disability is a beautiful aspect of human diversity, same as any other salient identity, and I hope that this reading serves as proof that we, as disabled people, have a lot to share with the world. That's all for now. Remember that you are wonderful, and that the world is a better place because you're in it. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Bye!